This is your reminder that the BBC has yet to address the consistent transphobic leanings in its news coverage, and while the team behind Doctor Who is not connected to this in any way since this is a BBC-owned property, I'm going to keep pointing it out until the problem gets resolved. Links in a pinned comment below if you don't know what I'm talking about. I'll stop saying it when it stops being a problem.
Well, I didn't think we'd be talking about this anytime soon. So, at the time of this being released, 2 Doctor Who episodes ago, so not the most recent one, but the one before that, we got Rogue. And while a lot of the talk had about that was, you know, how gay it was. Because, yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a major factor. There was also this scene where we see a number of faces that are former faces that the Doctor's had, and there's one there that we haven't seen on the main show before, that being Richard E. Grant's face. Now, I did go into a little bit in my review of Rogue as to who that was, but you know what? He's so obscure, I feel like this deserves a little bit more attention, because most people don't know what the heck is going on, and maybe they've read a wiki, and maybe they prefer to learn this way. I don't know. We'll see. So, this is Richard E. Grant, who is an actor who has been involved with Doctor Who at various levels. Initially in a comedy sketch where he, along with a number of other notable UK actors, played a incarnation of the Doctor during the comedy special Curse of the Fatal Death. Now, Rowan Atkinson was the most prominent one featured there, but Richard E. Grant did play the Doctor for a little while. Now, that being a comedy sketch is obviously non-canon. Before we get into what this new thing in Rogue was referring to, fans of the show might also know him from his role as Dr. Simeon / The Great Intelligence. A recurring villain, actually returning from the classic era. The Great Intelligence was originally introduced as a second Doctor villain, and here being played by Richard E. Grant for a number of episodes. Initially being introduced as Dr. Simeon, a human being, and in the episode The Snowman, in that episode, the Great Intelligence was actually voiced by Ian McKellen.
Will the final piece be ready?
However, it would end up possessing Dr. Simeon, and then when we would see the Great Intelligence again later in episode like The Bells of St. John or The Name of the Doctor, Richard E. Grant is playing the part in those. But while those are connections that he has with Doctor Who, the one that matters now is a little bit of an oddity within Doctor Who. An oddity that has now been canonized, which does raise some questions. Mostly in terms of, boy, there could have been some really interesting stuff built off that never happened. So, The Scream of the Shalka was a web series of animated shorts ranging between 10 minutes and 15 minutes. There were 6 episodes of this, and it covered Richard E. Grant as what was intended at the time to be the canonical 9th Doctor. That is actually even made very specific within the episode itself. He refers to having had 9 faces up to that point.
Andy Warhol, as his name said, they always say that time changes things, but you actually have to change them yourself. Wonderful man. He wanted to paint all 9 of me.
Now, this was released on the web, and web animation in 2003, boy, let me tell you, rewatching this thing, it took me right back to Newgrounds. Because, yep, a lot of the hallmarks are right there. The big hurdle in trying to take this thing in, if you do seek it out, it's not the easiest thing to find, but it's out there. The major hurdle is the visuals, because It suffers from a lot of the problems that anything animated for the web around that point in time that was trying to look even vaguely realistic tended to suffer from. Generally, the best looking stuff was very stylized, and this is trying to look more or less realistic. And you can tell they had basically no money to do this whatsoever. There's a lot of hallmarks of how limited the resources on this were. Honestly, I'd say the big one is how far out of its way this thing goes to not show limbs or full walk cycles. So many shots, especially conversations, are tight in on the face so that the only things being animated are the eyes, eyebrows, and mouth. And that's basically it. Because if they pulled back and did even, Lord forbid, a medium shot, well then, you'd have arm gestures and that. And that, while not hard to do, always looked worse. Like, that was the kind of stuff that if you were trying to go realistic and not stylized, limb movement was not great. And actually, you can kind of see that in the few shots where they have it. Usually in silhouetted shots like this one. You can kind of see the weird motion tweening that's going on to create this. As for the animation of the faces themselves, they're very, very limited. I'd actually say that's probably at least for me, the biggest detriment to this was it almost works better as an audio experience than a visual one because, again, due to incredibly limited resources, it's very clear that they don't really have alternate versions of these faces. They have a dead on and they have a side turn, and that's pretty much it. The facial expression, the general expression, almost never changes on anybody. Like, about the most you get for an expression is, obviously, you get the mouth moving to go with lips. Eyebrows will move a little, eyes will look this way or that way, and that's about it. The standard expression of the face just will not change. People don't smile. People who are frowning, even if the line indicates a more sense of joy, the face won't express that because that would require a completely fresh expression because a smile impacts your entire face. So you can really, really tell they had almost nothing to work with on the animation budget. Now, if you can get over that visual hurdle, and not everybody will, it's actually not too bad. This was written by Paul Cornell, who's a very talented writer. He's done writing in Doctor Who in various mediums. As far as the show proper, he is best known for writing the two-parter Human Nature and the Family of Blood, which is actually based off his own prose novel. In the novel version, it's the 7th Doctor as opposed to the 10th, which it was in the show. Also a very nice guy. I've met him at the Gallifrey 1 convention in Los Angeles a couple times. But he wrote the script for this, and Richard E. Grant is playing the Doctor. We also have Sophie Akinito playing Allison, who basically functions as the companion in this and is very much set up to be the companion for future stories if they ever happened, which they didn't. But she actually has also appeared on the show. She played Liz 10 during Series 5.
I'm the bloody queen, mate.
We've got a couple of other actors who would later appear on the show in this as well that I will highlight, but let's actually talk about the story. We start with a meteor crash on Earth, and something comes out of it. And like I said, it's almost a better audio experience. Honestly, the first episode especially almost feels like it might have been written as an audio drama. Not strictly speaking, but like there is the descriptions of what they're doing, like, oh, I can't move because, they're not going to just show that because that's harder. That's more work to animate, somebody trying to move but can't. Easier to just have them say it. So it comes across often at times like an animated iteration of an audio adventure. But there's been a meteor crash, and then a couple weeks later, the Doctor shows up. He does not want to be there. He's actually actively annoyed.
It's not where we're supposed to be. I'm going to take a look around. I don't want to be here!
Now we get our first look at him, and I would say this is the most emo the Doctor has ever looked. Part of it's the outfit, black and dark green with this collar that I'm not sure is really working for him, but also just the sunken expression and incredibly angular hair and facial hair. It's a very severe look, and Richard E. Grant does play into that general aspect of being, well, a little bit on the grouchy side. There's some initial references to a vague they who have apparently sent him here, that they've been sending him places where he needs to be to try and correct things. We never get a firm identity of they. Presumably it's the Time Lords, because who else would it be? But that's technically not confirmed. Now, the Doctor goes to a pub where he first encounters Allison, as well as the bar owner and a patron, and finds out, like, people are basically scared. They are staying in their homes, and they are not making noise. They're scared to make too much noise. We find out why relatively quickly as the TARDIS gets sucked down into the Earth, and then we soon meet the Shalka. And yes, this thing is called Scream of the Shalka. There is a lot of screaming, which honestly feels like a very classic Doctor Who thing. A lot of times in classic Doctor Who, whenever a monster that doesn't articulate in spoken language shows up, there tends to be a generic sound associated with them, whether it's a hum of like their equipment or it's like kind of thing that just goes on whenever they're on screen. Classic did that a lot. This is kind of continuing with that a little bit here. Now, I'm not going to go beat for beat throughout this story because it's largely what you expect. The Doctor encounters these creatures, calls in the military. It's not officially designated as unit, and we don't get the break back. It would have been nice. He actually would have fit in the role of the commander very well, but the commander that they get, I rather like, and is sort of a second in command, I guess. Soldier by the name of Greaves, I actually kind of like. He's just a little bit snarky. This Doctor, overall, also a little bit cheeky, especially when he's talking to the villains, like the Prime Shalka and so forth.
Why did you only invade a tiny bit of Lancashire?
Our ambition is greater than that.
Well, you mean Nottinghamshire?
But, you know, the normal things like, oh, I think I've defeated them. Oh, there's more than I thought. Oh, they're trying to do all this. Well, I'll try and stop them. Oh, I must save this person. It progresses about as you'd expect. And again, taking its cues largely from the classic era, because this, keep in mind, was pre-revival. That wouldn't come until a few years later when Christopher Eccleston would play the part for Russell T Davies. And taking cues from the classic era, every episode ends in a cliffhanger and so forth. So the story itself, while perfectly solid, is not necessarily something that's worth going over beat for beat on. However, there's a couple of interesting specific details that I definitely want to highlight. One of them being who it is that's in the TARDIS with the Doctor. And I'm not just talking about Allison, who is in there by the end. I mean, prior to that. We get the Master. Sort of. Now, this Master is voiced by Derek Jacobi. The same Derek Jacobi who would later play Professor Yana, revealed to be the Master, and who has been playing what has now been designated as the War Master for Big Finish. He's really great in those parts, and he's really good here. Given the design of this particular Master, I wouldn't be shocked if he was intended to be either the Roger Delgado or Anthony Ainsley incarnation of the Master. That's possible. It's not required. It is possible this is also just meant to be another regeneration with a similar look, because at the point that this happened, the Master had really just three looks. All crispy and burnt up looking, with a goatee, or Eric Roberts. So, you know, they went with what I think most would consider a more classic look. Now, you might be asking yourself, wait, the Master is traveling with the Doctor? Sort of? Maybe? Not exactly. So, this doesn't really get explained, and might well have been there as an intrigue and something to pick up on later. But we find out a couple episodes in, this is not exactly the Master. This is an android. But it also appears to have the Master's personality. He makes references to agreeing to travel with the Doctor. So the general sense that you get is that the Master is somehow trapped inside this android, or maybe he was finally going to die for real and the Doctor saved his mind, his essence, a scan of his brain, something, and put it into this android. he seems to be very much the master.
Why did I choose continuing existence? Listening to him being right all the time when I had the option of a slow, painful death? I can explain.
You don't have to.
Oh, good.
It's fascinating and honestly could have made for a really interesting long-term dynamic to figure out to what extent does the Doctor trust him? Why has the Doctor allowed this to happen? Especially looking down the line where we get someone like Missy, who did travel with the Doctor briefly, and who I will still be annoyed at the fact that we didn't get more episodes or even a full series of Missy being the companion to the Doctor, especially Capaldi's Doctor. But anyway, got to move on from that. It didn't happen. But it's just a fascinating concept. And it is something that I'd still kind of like to see the show explore. Now, I mentioned that this Doctor is a bit on the grumpy side. He's also a little bit quicker to violence, although we do get an initial cover for that with him saying, oh, those are going to just reform. They're fine. Although, later on, he will banish a number of Shalka, including the Prime Shalka, into a black hole, and pretty sure they're not going to reform after that. That having been said, this apparent contradiction, this desire to not kill, including an outright rejection of being handed a gun earlier, while at the same time being willing to do what he does to stop the Shalka in what they're trying to accomplish, the Doctor actually openly acknowledges.
I don't like the military, but I have so many friends in it. I say I do not kill, but then I exterminate thousands.
Which, again, is just a really interesting way to go about it, because oftentimes the Doctor has those kinds of contradictions, but is either trying to ignore them or is very, very, very angsty about it. Here, he seems kind of at peace with it. And that's, again, an interesting way to have him be. And despite all of his grumpiness, he is definitely still the Doctor. He is still not willing to sacrifice another person to try and stop the villains. He ultimately wants to help, as bitter and honestly kind of traumatized as he seemed. It is interesting to note that Russell T Davies did not like this incarnation of the Doctor. In fact, in Doctor Who magazine, when he was asked whether Richard E. Grant was ever in consideration to play the Doctor when the show was revived in 2005, Russell T Davies did not really mince words. He said flat out that he hated this incarnation, and he thought Richard E. Grant phoned in a performance and didn't do a good job. Which makes it all the more interesting that Russell T Davies is the one bringing the actor back and canonizing this version of the Doctor. Doesn't mean he's softened up, or at least softened up on Richard E. Grant as a performer. Maybe come to terms with the idea that if there were problems with this, it wasn't the actor's fault. I don't know. I couldn't find that he's said much on record about this specific thing, at least at the time that I'm recording this. So it's hard to know, but it is kind of interesting because he was not nice about this before. For my part, I think this Doctor is worth canonizing. He's got just the right level of heroism, as reluctant as he might be, and some great snarky lines along the way that give him that little zing.
You're not human. Decent of you to say.
What are you?
Mildly annoyed.
Now, of course, the question is, where the hell does this fall in within canon? The obvious answer would be probably along a similar line of wherever Joe Martin's Doctor falls. Partially because there is actually an interesting parallel between Joe Martin's Fugitive Doctor and the Shalka Doctor, which is they work for somebody else. Joe Martin's Fugitive Doctor works for Division. And as much as I don't really care for that storyline, or the fact that it's basically confirmed that she predates the Hartnell incarnation of the Doctor, while I don't like those facts, that is what we're currently working with. And at the very least, the idea of working for the Time Lords or some faction within them, that's true of this Doctor as well as the Fugitive Doctor. So it would make sense if this is either an incarnation immediately before Joe Martin's Doctor, where maybe he's the one who got into the situation of working for the Time Lords or Division or whoever, and then at some point regenerated into her and continue to do so, or comes after her and maybe is gotten more jaded with the work, is fed up, is burnt out, and really just wants to stop. Now, obviously, was he designed and invented in order to fit in that way? No, obviously. Show hadn't even been revived yet, much had Joe Martin been introduced. But if you want to try and figure out where to slot him in, I would say either immediately before or immediately after Joe Martin, wherever her doctor happens to land. That's still a little bit nebulous, although Pre Hartnell is pretty much the safe bet. That is my best guess. Now, if you were hoping for a bit more in the way of theory and lore crafting, I don't have a lot for you. Some have speculated that this would mean we would actually get some appearance of Richard E. Grant as this doctor, and while that is a possibility, I'm not holding my breath for that necessarily. Doctor Who has had a history of canonizing not previously confirmed bits of canon on the show, and not usually so they can do more with it, just to be like, yeah, that's a thing, we'll say it's official. I mean, that's basically what happened with the 8th Doctor in the episode The Next Doctor, where he appeared really briefly in the flash of what were at the time all of the incarnations of the Doctor, up to and including David Tennant as the 10th Doctor. Because remember, at that point, while Paul McGann had been playing the 8th Doctor in audio form for a while, those weren't confirmed as canon, and it had not really been firmly established whether or not the 1996 TV movie that he starred in was considered canon. It was acknowledged there. Now, McGann would appear a little bit later in The Night of the Doctor, which itself would do a little bit further acknowledging of some other media and canonizing that by having him cite the names of a number of audio-specific companions.
Charlie, Carey's Lucy, Tamsin, Molly.
So that's kind of what I expect from this. I don't expect more. I don't expect that we will actually see even a short like Night of the Doctor featuring Richard E. Grant's Doctor. If they did do it, I think that would be pretty cool. But I kind of expect that this is it. This is a cool Easter egg for people who are in the know. And if you're not, well, now you have something to be made aware of and look into, and maybe watch again if you can get over the visual jank, because budget of a sausage sandwich. That's what this thing had for its animation. You can really tell. Oh, and one last fun final fact before we close out. Although he goes uncredited because it's such a small part, David Tennant also voices a character in this.
We're locked up for the weekend!
Yeah, so how about that? So, Scream of the Shalka Doctor. You know what? If Richard E. Grant wanted to work with Big Finish, that could be interesting. In a way, Big Finish kind of did pick up on it because the audio drama Immortal Beloved was originally being developed as a Shalka sequel, but it was readapted with the 8th Doctor into an audio adventure once the direction of Doctor Who became the revived show with Christopher Eccleston. So there's still more room to do stuff, and given the nature of Big Finish and their love of pulling small obscure things and doing a lot with them, they gave a series to Jago and Lightfoot, for crying out loud. I would actually rather kind of like to see them crack this open and run with it a bit. Because now it's been canonized, I would imagine that makes it easier for them to do. I don't know. We'll see. I'm not expecting Richard E. Grant to show up on the show, but I do generally like Richard E. Grant whenever he shows up in literally anything, so I'm here for it if it happens. That's the Shalka Doctor, as much as I've got to share with you about him and what he is from. What do you think of this? Have you actually watched Scream of the Shalka? What did you think of that? What do you think of pulling in this kind of obscurity and making it official? Whatever your thoughts are on any of this, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills, enables me to do this as my living, even if you can't help me out that way. Like, share, subscribe. They all help me out. Don't worry too much about it, though. We take a relaxed attitude around here. Nope, that is the wrong outro. I had considered making this a break room video. That's why I started to do the outro for my secondary channel. Why not? Why not go and subscribe to that while we're here? Heck, why not? We'll turn it into a plug. What I really want you to remember, despite my confusion as to what channel I'm making this video for, is that you are beautiful. You are valid. You are loved. You are the council, and I am just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.
And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfula, Goddess Elida, Oliver B., Melissa Pedersen, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Jean Foray, Ulrich Bogdan, Loki Eris, Linda Walters, Jen, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Renabulax the Poodle, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Kasparov, Dave Hall, Quite Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Toku Bluhuvian, Pao Rabajago, and Mara G. If you'd like to hear your name in the credits, or even just see them, there are rewards on the Patreon, so maybe check those out.